And so from my understanding as well is Russ has made it very clear that he is more funny than I am. And I'm here to validate that. He is more funny than I am. This class is gonna be a nightmare for you. Buckle up, because if you don't pass the test, your license is gone. Right? Exactly what you want to hear.
Yeah. So he's not fun, but. Okay, so I'm just gonna turn it over to Rob. I'll pull it up for you guys that are on Zoom. Just a reminder again, that you need to put your name in the chat box and also your license number at least once. And in order for us to give you credit, you got to keep the cameras on, which everybody's got, so we're good. So,
Okay.
all right, I'm gonna get this pulled up for you.
All right. Thanks, Russ. We're glad to have him. Glad to have his comedy. Who was in the room when he made that statement? That you were there? You remember?
Not a good start.
I think
What,
everybody.
off to a
Not a good start.
good start or off to a bad start?
Good start.
Good start. All right. I was being serious though. That was a lot.
It's all downhill.
There you go. It's all done. See, I can only improve now. That's the good part. So, okay, how many of you have at least written an offer? I know a couple of you have. Okay, so hopefully this won't be complete, everything completely new. I promise you this, even if you've written offers, we are going to cover stuff that you have not heard of, didn't know about. I'm sure somebody's probably told you something that's probably incorrect. We're going to hopefully try to correct some of that stuff right now. And then the other thing is we want this to be an interactive opportunity for you. So let's definitely ask questions. We're going to give everything that we're going to be covering today is going to be giving you examples of what has happened. So the whole purpose of today is to help you understand a little bit more of what is involved. We're not going to have time to cover the entire contract. When I teach this at Stringham, it's a 4-hour class. And we're going to be having to do that in 1 hour and 50 minutes. So that ought to tell you that we will not have time to cover it.
Just everybody make sure you sign in on the sign-in sheet. I think most have, but just keep an eye, make sure you do, because that's how I keep track of this.
Perfect. Okay, so we'll jump in right now. Believe it or not, this first paragraph, we're going to probably spend 20 minutes just on this first paragraph. And the reason for that is because this first paragraph is probably the most important section in the entire contract, because it's dealing with the public's money. And the division, who knows what the division is?
Department of Real Estate.
The what?
Department of Real Estate.
Okay. Department of Real Estate Division. What do they oversee? Or let me say, are they your friend?
Most of the time.
I would probably say the division is not your friend. They are there to protect the public. And when we don't do our job that protects the public, they're not going after the public, they're going after us. So bottom line is they're the ones that are basically determining whether or not you have a license or not. So we want to make sure that what we're doing keeps us in good standing with the division. Okay, so that's what my job is, because if you get in trouble, then just automatically I may get in trouble, and I don't want to get in trouble. All right, so that's what I'm ultimately here for, is to help you make sure. What does Jerry sign, or Jerry Maguire say? Help me help you. Some of you guys are too young. Jeremy, what do you guys know what Jerry Maguire movie was? Exactly. See, that's my point. Youth. The youth. All right. I actually know Allie for probably your entire life. And so I get to pick on her. All right. Okay, so this is talking about earnest money, which is dealing with the public's money. And I want to make sure you guys understand what this paragraph is and how it works, because I promise you there are going to be agents that you're going to be working with on the other end of the transaction that are going to tell you it's something that is it is not. And I'm gonna tell you what this actually is, and what I'm telling you, I guarantee is correct. Okay, so the first part about it, the offer date, the name of the parties, we're not gonna focus on that. We're gonna focus on the next section. How many days do you have to get earnest money deposited after the transaction goes under contract? Okay, got a 4, 8,
Four.
okay, so I'm hearing 4 or 8. Any other numbers?
3.
I heard a 3. 3, okay,
So is it 4 after acceptance or?
okay. There's one answer that has not been, there's still the right answer hasn't been said. Any other guesses? The answer, and
3 working days.
okay, 3 working days. First off, like a disclaimer, I'm not an attorney, so I'm not giving legal advice, but I work enough with attorneys and talk to enough attorneys and actually get sued enough by attorneys. That's what it comes to, it sounds to be the answer they tend to give all the time is, it depends. That's kind of like the legal response, is it depends. So the answer to my question is it depends. Now, there are 2 dates that we have to look at, 2 timelines we have to look at. The first timeline is when we receive earnest money. And then the second part is when we deposit earnest money. So the 2 numbers that I heard the most of, which are basically correct, 4 and 8. So the answer to those questions were yes, they're partially right. We have up to 4 days on each of those timelines, and we have a maximum of 8 days that can be applied. Now let's break up what those numbers mean. So the first part, as we talk about it, says the property described below and agrees to deliver no later than 4 calendar days after acceptance. So this is the first timeline that we're talking about, is once the contract is accepted, so we have acceptance, that's when the first clock is ticking. You have up to 4 calendar days to receive the earnest money check. Okay. That's fine. An earnest money deposit in the amount of, let's just say $5,000 in the principal check. So that's once it's been accepted, we've got to receive it within that 4 calendar days. After acceptance of the REPC by buyer and seller and receipt of the earnest money by the brokerage, then the brokerage shall have 4 calendar days in which to deposit the earnest money into the brokerage trust account. So that's where the 4 and 4 come together, which is a maximum of 8. But let's say that we get the acceptance occurs, and 2 days after acceptance, I receive the earnest money. Well, then, so now that's occurred. The acceptance has happened and the receipt has happened. So now the next clock is already ticking. And if the brokerage deposited in that 4th calendar day, the maximum days in that example would have been 6. So you see where my answer makes sense. It depends on when the first clock is done ticking and when then the second clock begins or stops clicking. If we got it deposited 2 days after the brokerage got the money, then the maximum days in that example ended up being 4. So the answers to depend. But this is important to understand because you guys are constantly dealing with clients where you're trying to get the earnest money, trying to determine if the earnest money was received. Your client, I mean, if you haven't had this experience, you will have this experience where you represent a seller and you've gone under contract. The contract's been accepted. And then all of a sudden the seller gets another offer and it's 10 times better than the offer that they've accepted. The seller wants to get out of the contract that they've accepted. And the seller comes to you, hey, how can we get out of this contract? What would you say?
You cannot.
I'm intentionally wanting to ask this question because there are things that you should say and other things you should not.
That depends.
I love the answer. Hey, you learn quick. I like that. All right. It depends on what? What are some thoughts?
What your attorney says, bro.
Okay, that's one of the first things. That's an example. Hey, how can I get out of this contract? Well, once you start saying, well, what you need to do is this, you're now giving legal advice. And if that happens, and you advise them to get out of a contract, which they are officially under, then you could be steering your client down a direction that is a rabbit hole that could be dangerous. So, but I didn't just phrase it to leave you hanging. What I would look at and say, well, again, not an attorney, can't give you all the legal advice there, but let's look at the contract that's here and find out from a seller's perspective. Seller doesn't have the right to really just cancel the contract very easily. But what they do have, and we're going to talk about this under section 16, is if the buyer ends up being in default. If the buyer's in default, well, now the seller has a right to cancel a contract. So if the earnest money is not deposited in time, is the buyer in default? The answer to that question would be yes, they would be in default. And so that could be a way that the seller could cancel. So if the second offer comes in, and now you're the agent representing the buyer, and I'm now representing the seller, and I ask, hey, was the earnest money, when was the earnest money deposited? Let's just say you said you deposited on the 5th day. Oh, you're in default. We're going to cancel. Great. We accept this offer. Who says I'm right? Who says I'm not right? Okay. At least thank you for being honest. I'm not right. Who says depends? There we go. It would depend, because if I would have deposited the earnest money on the 5th day, it could have been correct if I received it, say, on day 2. And then we got it deposited within 4 days after that. And so if I took that assumption and didn't understand this paragraph, and I only went, oh, after day 5, you got it deposited. Now I tell my client, yep, we got proof that it was deposited late. Seller cancels, then the seller could be in default here. Because actually if he received it on day 2, he received it, then at that point they had 4 calendar days to get it deposited. But they got it deposited on the 5th day. They had until the 6th. They're still in contract. They did it right. And I didn't ask enough questions to determine exactly what happened and when that was. That's a sticky. So I give that example of saying, hey, we've got to think pretty clearly when we're dealing with this stuff. And the good news is you're not here alone. If you have questions, my door's open. We got other brokers' doors that are open as well. So these are the questions I'm begging you, please come and ask me if you're thinking down certain paths. Some of you call and you utilize that. That's great. That's what we're here for.
Better question. Just a clarification, really. So when my client writes me a check, I'm representing the buyer, right? And they write me a check, or the brokerage a check on a Saturday, and I go and pick it up, the brokerage has received it. Is that correct?
Are you a representative of the brokerage?
Yes.
Yeah, so
Yes.
the answer is yes.
And then I have until in this brokerage, I have until the next, I don't know, until 4 days to put it on Brianna's desk, but I want to make sure it's there as soon as possible.
So,
Monday, if the brokerage is open, she's here on Monday or Tuesday, right?
so what's your question?
The question is, it's not really a question, it's more of a statement, like, the brokerage has 4 days to deposit it. I know that,
After it's been received.
and this brokerage makes a deposit every business day, right?
Mhm.
So it's calendar or business?
Yeah.
So Sunday count?
So it's right here in the contract. Okay, so let me clarify the calendar business thing. So a few of you may have just recently taken your real estate exam. And I promise you probably saw one or either a question that'll say 3 business days or 4 calendar days. Which is it? Okay, little advanced question. So the division rule says it's 3 business days is the rule. 3 business days is what the division has. It also says, or whatever else has been agreed upon. I don't know the exact same language, whatever's been specified. So the contract changes it. And because of that, that's the reason why it's not business days, because the contract has made the specification to clarify it. So don't, now that you've passed the test, that's the trick question of the test. Don't worry about follow what's on the contract at this point. Don't think business days. We don't have any other document that talks about business days unless you guys draft an addendum that says business days. Then you're gonna have to look at that. But otherwise, any state document that we have, formal document that's out there, I can't recall anything that specifies business days. But back to Rich's question, and let me extend it for you, is if I understand what you're getting at is we need to be mindful of when we receive this. So what was it? Labor Day was last week, something like that. So Monday, the office was closed, right? Okay. So let's say that your offer got accepted on Friday. The Friday before that, so the following Monday would have been Labor Day and the office would have been closed. So gets accepted. So Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. Tuesday is the fourth day. Well, again, we got to break it up. So in your example, if you received the earnest money on Saturday, the day after your offer got accepted, so now you'd have Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday to receive it. That's when you received it on Saturday. So now Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday is when we have to have it deposited in that case. But let's say that the offer gets accepted on, this happens all the time. Your offer gets accepted Thursday night, Friday, you got weekend plans, you're heading out of town. And Monday happens to be a holiday because you're going out of town, right? You're having a 4-day weekend. If it got accepted on Thursday, so Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, you got a problem. Now, hopefully, and it's not Monday at midnight, by the way, we're going to talk about the contract here as well. There's a different timeline that's going to be specified. So if you're going out of town, don't think that, oh, no big deal, we'll get that later. You have timelines here, so you got to make things work. So I'll get your question in a second, Carlos. Let me complicate things even more. And the reason why I'm trying to complicate this, because I really want you to understand this paragraph. When you write let's say you wrote the offer, you write the offer on a Wednesday, okay? And when you wrote the offer, your client, because they came in from out of town, they're leaving Wednesday night, and so they gave you a copy of the check already. So now you have a copy of the check, and it's Wednesday. Thursday, your offer gets accepted. Your offer gets accepted. So my first question is, acceptance has occurred on the property and we've already received the check. Has that first timeline, is it still going or has the timeline been met? Been met. Who says it's been met? Who says it's still going? Who says it depends? Any depends on that one? I think that one's pretty firm. It's been met. There is no depend on that one. So that timeline has been met. So now we're on the second timeline. You have 4 calendar days for the brokerage to get it deposited. So we now go back into our other example. We're heading out of town, right? Thursday night, it goes under contract and it went, you found out at 7 o'clock. So the office is now closed and you're supposed to leave out of town at 6 o'clock in the morning. And it's a long weekend, remember? And you're planning on coming back Monday night. So you're leaving Friday morning. Office is not open at this point. Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday at 5 is when we've got to have the earnest money in, not only into the brokerage, but it's got to be deposited. Labor Day. Okay, so what do you do? I know what I would do. Carlos?
Try to negotiate an extension for this with
Okay.
your agent and be like, hey, this is the new or X many days.
Okay, did everyone understand what he's saying?
Oh,
Right now, the contract says you have 4 calendar days to get it deposited.
It needs to be accepted.
And Carlos made a suggestion of saying, hey, let's do an addendum extending the deadline for the earnest money to be deposited. Can you do that?
Yes.
Great suggestion. That works. Okay, what if you don't do that? Then what?
You can be in default.
Well, not yet. Are there any other options out there?
Possibly accept it a couple days later somehow.
Okay, well, you already accepted it. You've already received it.
So that part's done.
So we got to get it into the bank.
So looking ahead, we can't accept it later before we officially accept it.
So you're asking to accept it twice.
Well, I'm asking to accept it one time, knowing what some situations coming.
Okay, so
Ahead of
let
time.
me simplify what I think you're trying to say. Anything that we're going to talk about in regards to the contract, I will always say, what does the contract say? And if you're trying to modify what the contract says, then you better do an addendum to modify it. So if what you were trying to suggest, I'm okay with that as long as you do an addendum to modify what's already there. Because if you don't create an addendum, I have to turn to the written word, and the written word says, hey, it's already received. If you're trying to change the terms, do an addendum to change the terms. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I was trying to say is, Mr. Buyer, because of the conflict in timing, could we accept on Monday instead?
Oh, you're saying, but, okay, but remember,
Actually change acceptance, or not change. it,
okay,
the-
I think I understand now.
See what's done.
It could work with what you're saying, just not in the example I gave, because the example I gave,
So we are-
I received it on Wednesday. They flew out of town back to wherever they were. And we found out Thursday night that it got under contract. So I already had it received before it went under contract. But could I have that conversation before they left? Just, sorry, what's your name? Greg? So Greg, hey, normally I would accept this earnest money right now. My concern is I'm going to be out of town. And if we get this under contract during that time frame, it's going to be tough to get that earnest money to me. So let's do this. I'm going to assume that if we can get this under contract tomorrow, that we'll want to have this. I don't want to get this received until Monday by 5 o'clock. That way we've got more time. Sure, I could do something like that. Now keep in mind, you're trying to mail earnest money or whatever. You got separate issues, but at least you're being proactive, okay? That works. Any other,
Another person from the brokerage. don't know?
okay, this is where I was going with it. But what I was thinking, could you give, if I've already got that earnest money, hopefully you establish relationships with another agent here. I'm here to tell you that if you don't, you're making life difficult on yourself, because how many of you hope to someday go on a vacation? Okay? When you are on a vacation, are you still a real estate agent? Yes. How many of you are not going to tell your client that you're on vacation? Liars. Because I guarantee I get the phone call, I can't get a hold of my agent, really. They're on a cruise somewhere, they can't never tell their client where they are. I'm here to tell you, it's okay to tell your client you're going on vacation. It's called preparing them, you're going on vacation. And then if you fix all the issues, it's no problem, because that's a separate story. But anyway, yes, tell your clients this. So when you are on vacation, you've got somebody else that's managing your business for you when you're gone. So I could call Valley, hey, mind if I bring this check? Are you going to be in the office tomorrow? Oh, thank goodness. Great. Perfect. I'm going to drop this check off for you. Would you mind turning it into the front desk so that we can get this deposited? Does that work? Great suggestion. Awesome. There's one more that you probably, only those that have been in the brokerage should know. Anyone new, you won't know. We have a software that is called Earnest. And it's basically like an online ability for your client to do an earnest money deposit. Works great, unless you, right now we're trying to solve Mountain America, for whatever reason, they have issues with the program, and I've been in communication with them. We're trying to get that resolved. But if you have an issue with them, or use Earnest, it works fantastic. We show that it's deposited. It works great. So all I'm trying to have you see is when you're receiving earnest money or getting earnest money into the brokerage, may be aware of timelines. And I'll end with this last part. If on the fourth day, so let's say that Monday was not a holiday, you're coming back from your vacation, you show up at 4 o'clock Monday, the fourth day, slap the check on the counter. I made the deadline. Great. Woo, good. I'm here to tell you, you may have met a deadline of getting it in, but we have staff that has to start their final accounting before the 5 o'clock deadline. And you're going to miss the timeline. So get that earnest money to us as soon as possible. That's the best answer. Just get it in whenever you can. Otherwise, because if it is at 4 o'clock on that fifth day, there's chances are that they've already run the deposit and it's going to be missed. Okay.
When we say the as soon as possible and 4 o'clock is not acceptable, well.
9 o'clock in the morning on that day would be perfectly acceptable. So I don't care. I mean, where I'm going at it is we're all responsible adults, right? We procrastinate, we do all kinds of stuff. This is something that I would not procrastinate. Just look, if we can't be in the office at that time well enough, then look for another solution to make sure that it happens. That's it. We got to just we're all adults. Okay. You guys feel okay about this? Hopefully you understand it. It is a big deal. I promise you, an example we've had where a contract was $100,000 earnest money and the buyer didn't get it deposited in time. They didn't get it in deposited and they're like, well, it's okay. I'll just cancel. Okay. Can the buyer do that? Okay. Actually, let me tell you about a current ongoing lawsuit right now that have been filed with the courts. I think it's $50,000 earnest money. It was just filed 2 months ago. $50,000 earnest money. And the buyer never turned in the earnest money. And they eventually just canceled. The buyer believes that because they canceled, even though they never turned in their earnest money, They just chose to cancel that they're not in default and they had the right to cancel. They canceled within their 14-day due diligence, but they never turned in the earnest money by the deadline. And they just canceled. Now, the seller filed a lawsuit claiming that the buyer's in breach for not getting the deposit. I'm actually glad there was a case that's finally been filed on like that, because I've been making this argument for years and having to have this argument with other brokers. And now we'll actually have a case, if it goes the distance, hopefully it does, to put an end to other people's opinions. So my opinion, our opinion is, if you don't get the earnest money in deposited or turned in by the deadline, your buyer is in default. That is the position of our company. And therefore the seller would be entitled to the default remedies that are in section 16. So let's make sure that our client is not the one in default. All right. Okay, a lot of information right there. We're going to,
Really quick, if they're using earnest, I'm not familiar with it, so if you say earnest made 5,000 in the form of like e-check or what do you?
yeah, it's earnest. Everyone know what an ACH payment is? That's what it's being done. So you could say ACH, it's not a wire, it's an ACH payment.
Okay.
But you could say that. Okay. I'll go really, I'm seeing,
I have a question
Yeah.
about that. So what if you didn't know they were gonna use earnest and you put in the form of check?
check.
Do you need to change that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I've had this conversation with attorneys too, because if you said wire, let's just say you did a wire transfer, well, you do a personal check. And it actually happened. Well, you didn't do it, you didn't follow the contract or what's there. The position is, and having the conversation is, where's the damage? If the earnest money was deposited there, where is the seller damaged? Where is the buyer damaged? So the answer is, if you can do an addendum to modify it, that's always the safest answer, because then now you leave no question. But if you didn't, I'm not concerned about it, because no party's in damage. People bring up the next issue, they use this as an example, then what's the problem? Why do I need to have an addendum that says that I'm depositing the earnest money into a title company's trust account versus the brokerage? If the earnest money got deposited, where's the damage? The answer to that question is, the damages are completely different. One, yes, it's saying that where the location of where that needs to occur is different, for one. Second of all, title company is not insured by it's not monitored by the real estate commission. They're monitored by the insurance division. So if a title company chooses not to release that earnest money because of the terms of the contract, that's within their right. And now that potential seller or buyer is unable to get that earnest money and where we follow the contract. And so you could say that earnest money is being held hostage. And now the buyer or seller has damage because they can't retrieve it. So it is different in that example. But the fact that earnest money is supposed to be held in the brokerage, and whether we wire transfer or cashier's check, we got the money. There's no damage to that buyer or seller with that process. I saw there.
I was gonna say, sometimes underwriters will want the correct, like, deposit information when they follow the paper trail to document theirs.
To help.
But they'll ask. and
Because
some underwriters
they're
don't
trying to season the funds.
Yeah.
They got to verify where the funds came from.
To count on.
So
the
yes,
asset.
that part is correct. And
I usually just put check or EBT. That's nice.
no problem. Yeah, you can put it in. If you know it's gonna be one of two options, wire, check, or ACH, whatever. Now you give the options. So
They're writing a check, who are they making out to?
Century 21 Everest Trust account is what I always tell people.
I guess it's going to the trust.
Okay, real quick, just in this paragraph, we're gonna go real. I used to do this kind of elaborate question asked, trying to go down a rabbit hole and stuff. When you're dealing with included items, we're not seeing it as much as we were 2-3 years ago, but the things that you got to be made aware of in today's technology world, everyone, they're trying to do the Bluetooth wireless options. When, like when the Nest thermostat first came out, that was a hot item because people were like, they market that they had a Nest thermostat, and then the closing would occur and they ripped that Nest thermostat off and they replaced it back with the one, the old one that existed. And they're like, what? That's totally separate. That's totally different. No, you couldn't do that. This, and to me, the language is very clear. It just says, unless excluded herein, the sale includes the following items if presently owned and in place on the property: plumbing, heating, air conditioning fixtures, and equipment. So yes, the Nest thermostat needed to remain, but then it's now extended to, okay, what about the security system that you have, where they're now connected to the door locks, the Vivint system that you have, it's all intertwined. And they sell the home and it's all got this elaborate system, and you show up and you can even see it where the paint is now exposed because they've replaced that cool door lock system with just a normal key lock. And you got this, I mean, I've seen it all. Just if there's things that are in question that you're worried about, you're better to put it in the contract than not. And then the other thing that's here, I see it all the time. On the MLS, it says Vivint security system excluded, but it's not put here. Who's right? Is it
Contract.
contract governs? MLS is for informational purposes only. Doesn't matter what's on the MLS, it matters what's here. This is the binding agreement. Okay, but the problem that I'm trying to avoid is the other broker on the other side may think, no, it's on the MLS, it matters. And now we created a problem because they're telling their client one thing, we're telling our client another thing, and now you're not coming together. Our job is to make things easier, not more difficult. Okay. Real quick, under section 2.2. Very simple. We get these situations that happen all the time. This paragraph is a great addition to the contract. I'm glad we added this a couple years ago. It just says, if proceeds from the sale of a property are intending to be used for the purchase, then you must include the subject to sell addendum. Very simple. Buyer's ability to purchase the property to obtain the loan referenced in section 2.1 above, and or any portion of the cash referenced in 2.1 above is or is not conditioned upon the sale. I hear this all the time. Well, my client doesn't have to sell, but they just don't want to. So if they can sell this property, then great. They want to use the proceeds that way. They don't want to have to hit their 401k or whatever to take all the money out. So, but they don't have to. So that's why we didn't include it. Oh, it doesn't matter if you have to or not. Are any portion of the money that you're getting going to be used for the purchase? The answer is yes. Well, then you've got to include this in your offer. Pretty straightforward. Does that make sense? So if you're the listing agent and they don't do that, it's not if or want. They got to do it. Okay. We understand that. What's the difference between settlement and closing?
Settlement is just signatures, and then closing is like the wires going through.
Okay, I'd say you're 90%. You're missing one thing,
Recording.
Recording.
okay? That's part, I mean,
Oh,
that's part of. That is a part of the closing side. There's something else that happens at settlement.
Signing the documents.
Heard something, what,
There's the documents.
okay, they have the documents there.
Sign them.
Title or signatures.
And
They
I've
have
got
to sign
signatures,
them.
okay? What else has happened? There's something else that the buyer has to do. Do what?
The wire.
You're close, you're moving down, that actually is a closing, but you're moving down in the direction that I want. She said that the funds are dispersed. That is happening more in closing, but that's where I'm kind of going. Something else deals with funds.
Exception.
The buyer pays the money,
What money?
whatever they owe, the money, they're, whatever they have agreed to pay as deposit. They pay
Okay.
the Deposit.
Their down payment.
Yeah,
The down payment is also due. So. We go up here. This breaks it down. Let's just say it's a $300,000 purchase. We're putting 10% down. Which is 30 grand. And let's say the earnest money was $5,000. Right? So we have 5 grand here. The new loan amount will be 270. Balance of purchase price is what? 25,000. It's not 30, because the 5 grand part counts as part of the down payment. So it's the 25 plus the 5 equals the 30. All those numbers up. To this day, I still do this. I will get on a calculator and add this up. And I want to make sure this number and this number match. Because sometimes you're going to have, instead of a simple number, 270,000, you're going to have $271,922. Whatever it is. Just take the time, add the numbers up, but those numbers there should add up to whatever the number is up there. So the 10%, the 25 grand is what is due at settlement. And why I bring that up goes back to my first question. If the buyer, and this happened a month ago, the buyer goes to the settlement, signs all the documents, and then they went to go get a cashier's check afterwards to bring in the money that was due at settlement. And they went and got the check, and they did something else. All of a sudden, 5 o'clock passed, and they didn't get back to the title company. Oh, we'll just bring it into you tomorrow, because it's going to fund and record tomorrow anyway. They already missed the funding and recording date for today. So they thought, oh, I'll just bring it in tomorrow with all the rest of the money. Well, I'm going to ask you the question. Settlement shall take place no later than the settlement deadline referenced in section 24, or as otherwise mutually agreed by buyer and seller writing. Settlement shall occur only when all of the following have happened. Buyer and seller have signed and delivered to each other or to their escrow closing office all documents required by the REPC, by the lender, by the title insurance, escrow offices, by written escrow, any monies required to be paid by buyer or seller under these documents. In that example that ended up happening, because they did not get that cashier's check on the day of settlement, they missed their settlement deadline. The seller ended up canceling because they were looking for a way to get out of the deal. Just because they did not come back and deliver that check the day of settlement. They turned it in the day of, which was the following day. They missed their settlement deadline, buyers in default. So technically, as we're going to read in section 16, because the buyer's in default, one of the remedies would be the earnest money would be able to go to the seller. So not only they didn't close, the seller could retain that 5 grand in earnest money as one of the default remedies. See how dates matter, times matter? We think of it, and I talk to agents all the time. It's not a big deal. I'll use this example. There's only a problem when there's a problem. Then we have a problem. Can buyer and seller, let's just say you have the most horrific contract that is written. I've seen a lot of them. But buyer and seller, like, I know that's what it says, but that's not what we intended. And buyer and seller, oh, well, that's fine, no big deal, we're working out. And they end up closing with no issue. They close with what they intended to, but the contract was not even close to what they intended it to be. But buyer and seller said, no, that's not what we intended. We wanted it this way. And they close and it's no problem. Well, because buyer and seller didn't make it a problem. Well, you could have 99.9% of the contract right. When a buyer or seller is looking for a way to get out of the deal, and then that little problem occurs, now you've got a problem, big problem. So that's why our job is to make sure that everything matters, because we never know. It may not matter to me, may not matter to somebody else, but it might matter to the other party. And we don't want to be stuck in that middle. So yeah, that deal failed because of that. So settlement is they sign all the documents and they have to bring their deposit, the remaining money that they owe, not the money that the lender is going to be paying. That's part of closing. But they need the money for the deposit. That's the difference. And it's by 5 o'clock on that settlement deadline. Okay.
So just last thing, if in the case you were saying the person didn't come back in time, so legally the other party is entitled to call up and say, hey, you defaulted and I'm keeping your.
Yeah,
money.
at that point, the seller, I can tell you what they did. They provided a seller's notice of cancellation based on buyer default. Because the buyer did not settle by the deadline.
And they kept the answer.
I don't remember what the remedy was. More than likely that was what they asked for, because that's the easiest solution. But we'll go through in section 16, we'll talk about the remedy, what default looks like. Possession. Just common sense type stuff. Too many times I get the impression that we as agents were trying to make ourselves look better to our clients. And so sometimes we have to, we think the way that we can do that is like, I protected you, clients, because I took the other side down. You know, it's a win-lose situation. This happened. Guess what? I was there to protect you. Big old mighty Rob came over there and said, there you go. Good thing you listed with me, or you signed the contract with me, buyer, because I did this, right? We try to set things up to make ourselves look better versus making this transaction smooth so that our clients don't even think they realize there was a problem. They thought it was so smooth. Maybe it was too easy. I'd rather have that. Just make it a smooth transaction. So where I'm going with this on possession, I get this all the time. They know that I can just tell you, does my buyer or most of our buyers, when the transaction closes, when do they want the keys? They want the keys right when it got under contract, quite honestly. They want to move in right immediately, even though it's not going to close in 30 days. But they, of course, they want the keys as soon as they are the owner of the property. All right, I get it. And when is the seller okay giving the keys?
Money has been funded. And
Are you sure? Think about it. When is a seller okay to give the keys?
after they moved out.
Yeah, when they're ready to move.
Okay,
Under-
once they're gone, okay, now I'm willing to give the keys. Right? So if we have a property that is occupied and I represent the buyer, I know when my buyer wants to get in the house. But can I make things simple and prepare my client to say, hey, let's first ask the seller how much time they need. But even if I don't get a hold of them, they're in the property. Chances are they're gonna want at least a day or two to get out of the property, buyer. So just to make sure that our offer looks better than the other person's, let's give them a day or two to get out of the property. Does that sound fair, buyer? Oh yeah, that sounds great. Because that's when you're writing the offer, that's when they're willing to do whatever. Versus I put recording the property's occupied. And now when we go under contract, oh, the seller needs to buy some time. Nope, my client will not let you do it. They don't want to sign that. I'm creating a problem that I don't, if I can be proactive, I can avoid issues because I'm thinking in advance. And the same thing, if it's a vacant property, does the seller care if you give them time afterwards when it funds and growth? Probably not. So just by a rule of thumb for me, if it's vacant, great, I'll put possession upon recording. If it's occupied, I'll prepare my buyer that at least, a day or two there. But I'll also ask, hey, how much time does the seller need to get out of the property? Oh, they plan on being gone a week before closing, so it's not going to matter. Okay, great. It happens all the time where I've got movers already lined up. The seller hasn't even begun packing. They're showing up at the doorstep. The buyer's agent and the buyer claiming they're going to go call the sheriff to get the seller out of the home. And I'm like, you can make that phone call all day long. It's not going to happen. I'm here to tell you, if that happens, seller hasn't begun to get out of the property, and the seller is being a complete idiot about the process. If you're trying to force them out of the house, you've got to get a court order to make that happen. And you're 3 weeks away from that happening. It's not going to happen on the day your movers are at the house. So at that point, even though it sucks, if I were in that situation, I'd be like, prepare my buyer. Hey, let's be as amicable as we can, because that'll incentivize the seller to hopefully get out quicker. And then after they get out, you can go ahead and try to sue them for the damages that's there. But I'm trying to avoid the problem at the very beginning. How much time do you need? What is this? We're having open conversations so that we can get it early on. Whereas some agents are they say on the MLS they need 72 hours, and then they go check the small little box and they hope that the seller doesn't bring it up as an issue to discuss, and the offer gets accepted. Awesome. Now the seller has to be on a recording, and we're not going to talk about it at all to bring it up to them. And the deal closes. The seller still thinks that they got 72 hours to get out of the property because their agent didn't ever look at the REPC either. And now the buyer shows up with the problem, and they've never, after the closing, got both parties right there pissed off. And the buyer's agent, hey, no, this is our contract, we're right, we're supposed to be here, blah, 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 blah. They're correct. Should have had the conversation and should never even gotten there. This is where we're supposed to be firefighters, not fire starters. We're not arsons. Let's put out the fires. Okay. Okay, let's just go here. Seller's disclosures. What are the seller's disclosures? Depends, right?
The condition of the property and any known information about the property that the seller may have.
Okay, I like that answer.
It's a legal document where the sellers are supposed to disclose everything, like he said.
Okay,
To the best of their knowledge.
okay. Any other thoughts?
HOA information.
Sometimes you guys think that I try to ask tough questions to get really in-depth, tough answers. As you get to know me, I will say, hey, let's make this as simple as possible. I'm all about simplicity. Here's the simple answer. Well, the seller's disclosures or whatever defined in the contract. Right? The seller's disclosures here, well, it's all of that. Those are the seller's disclosures. If you check other and you want something else, well, that's also a seller disclosure. So it's whatever the contract says it is. Now, we do have a separate document, which is item A, the seller property condition disclosure, that is now a 16-page document, just so you guys don't get all scared. It's horrible.
I mean, to fill it out, to have people fill it out.
Just so you know, I'm on the forms committee and helped create that. So you.
What I mean is, I don't mean that it's a horrible document to form, but it's horrible for people to fill it out.
Well, this is why I'm trying to add a little enlightenment. Just so you know, there's only about 3 or 4 things that were added to the old seller's disclosures, which used to be, I think, 7 or 8 pages. All we did is it was formatting. We formatted it differently, so now it gives you the ability to write in each section, and before it used to say yes, no, and didn't have an or NA. We've added that functionality. So the 20 or 30, the 3 or 4 questions that we've added, that would have been a half a page under the old format. The new, so it's a formatting issue. We didn't increase anything else otherwise. So just the appearance makes you think so much more to fill out. No, there was only 4 questions. So I set you up for that. So it's okay. But yeah, no, use those. A lot of those took a lot of time to make them go back and forth. Should we keep it small? Should we not? Should we do this? The problem that always comes from it is the continued issue that we kept hearing is, well, there's not enough space to write anything on the seller's disclosures other than yes or no. So no one would fill it in. So that's why we decided to make that change, to give them the ability to remove that condition. So, but those seller's disclosures, that's only one of the 11 possible things that need to be done.
What are some examples of what people put in other? Never seen.
I guess it would depend on, let's say that it could be, I mean, this one's not dealing with land, but let's say that you wanted to have with the property that has a building on it, it also has a lot of land. If you wanted to get a geothermal survey, it's called a geotech. If you wanted to do soil samples to see if there were any chemicals or whatever that were brought on it. If it was, heck, if you wanted to say that if it was any, you can put whatever you want. Let's just say it's been a property that's been tied up. I'll give you a second. It's been tied up under litigation for 5 years, and it apparently has just been, it's now done with the litigation, but you wanted to find out records that occurred from the previous HOAs. You can add stuff on there, but yeah, it's not used very often.
I once had a client that they knew the sellers had the original blueprints of the house.
Oh, yeah.
So
they wanted to include the blueprint.
Yeah, I didn't see it on the list, but
Yeah.
you know, I was like.
Great example. Great example. Yeah. Let me tell you the big thing that typically happens. So does the seller have a deadline on the contract to provide seller's disclosures?
Yes.
The answer is yes, they do. And there's no right or wrong answer, but it's typically 3 to 5 days after the contract is accepted. Well, the seller has to provide all this information to the buyer that applies. And if they don't do that by the deadline, they are in default. Just like the buyer not turning in earnest money, they're in default. So if you are listing a property, let's go back 6 months ago. For those of you that were doing business, 6, 8 months ago, were properties going under contract pretty quickly? Okay, is it fair to say that you listed the property and you got 15 offers on the same day? That you were now looking at it hours after you put active? Yes. And if you are in a property that has an HOA, if you did not get from the HOA or ask the title company to pull your title commitment before you put this on the MLS, you could have received an offer, accepted the offer, and that offer, not thinking about it, only gave you 1 to 2 days to provide seller's disclosures. And it's a weekend, it's a Friday night. So you're not going to get any HOA docs. You're not going to get a title commitment until at best the following Monday. And even then you're pushing it because the HOA is going to take time to do it. And the title company may be slammed and they can't get it for you. And now the deadline is passed and you got $25,000 earnest money. Your seller, you could cancel the contract based on this. 7, 8 years ago, we had a brokerage in Utah County that was making offers. They were making offers that their buyer would buy property. They would go around, but they were hoping that the seller would be in default. Because this is what they were doing. They were putting large earnest money deposits in their offers. And I question whether they truly intended to buy the property, but they were making an offer, $25,000 earnest money, but short seller disclosure deadlines, hoping the seller would miss it. 1 to 2 days. Sure enough, the deadline passed. The buyer canceled because the seller didn't default, and the seller then owed the 25 grand earnest money. And they went after it. So seller's disclosures are not just option A. Everything in this section. Okay. Section 8. In the military, it's a way to get out of the military, whether it be honorably or dishonorably, right? They're out. They're crazy. They're getting out. Well, this is our version of an honorable way of getting out of the contract. 8.1 talks about your due diligence. 8.2 talks about the appraisal. And 8.3 talks about financing. Those are 3 separate conditions. Even though the finance and appraisal is one deadline, those are 2 separate conditions. Okay, so don't forget that. Can you, if you wanted to, could you separate the appraisal and the financing deadline? The answer is yes, you could. You could say financing deadline to be October 1st, and the appraisal deadline is September 25th. Do an addendum, you could do that, no problem. If you're going to cancel, and the canceling this same section applies to the appraisal, well, not the appraisal, but the financing. If you're going to cancel, it says that in buyer's sole discretion, whose sole discretion?
Buyers.
The buyer's sole discretion. That the results of the due diligence are unacceptable, buyer may either, no later than the due diligence deadline, cancel the REPC by providing written notice to the seller, whereupon the earnest money deposit shall be released to the buyer without any further requirement from the seller. That's the thing I was talking about. That's in our contract. If the earnest money is held with the title company, I can't fulfill that now because the earnest money isn't held with us. So right here, it says if I cancel, I've got to do what as the buyer? How do I cancel?
Written notice.
Written notice. What's written notice?
Email.
Email, letter, text.
That's the appraisal.
Okay. Anyone? What's the question? So who believes that that's all written notice? Those 3. Who believes it's not written notice? Okay, 1. It depends. Am I any takers on that? Depends. Okay? I'm gonna actually disagree with you. It is written notice. So, under this section, right here, have they fulfilled this obligation to cancel? If they send a text message. Who says yes? Evelyn, you can raise your hand here. Okay? I know where she's going with it, so that's why I'm throwing her under the bus right now to take her out from under the bus in a second.
Does it have to be acknowledged?
Does it say that it has to be acknowledged? So the answer would be no. However, how do you prove that you did it unless you can show proof? So proof is always a good thing. It doesn't say that it has to be acknowledged here. Okay, so if I send a text message to you, hey, Carlos, sorry things didn't work out, but I'm canceling. My clients decided to cancel. Have I fulfilled this?
Yes.
The answer is yes. How many of you have done this? Probably the last time I would have done something similar, we didn't have text message, but that, so 15, whatever years ago, I probably sent an email 15, 20 years ago, and that would have been the same thing. If you've done this, or if you're still doing this, you're putting your client at risk. Actually, you're putting your client in default. Because this is where Evelyn was going with it. I'm going to advance to part of the contract that nobody ever reads, no one ever knows anything about. Section 18. There's an additional piece of the contract that nobody knows. Except as provided under section 23, which is talking about acceptance. All notices required under the REPC must be A, in writing. First off, is a cancellation a notice? Cancellation is a notice. So it falls under this category. It must be in writing, which the text message, email, letter by mail, snail mail, whatever it is, that's all written. It's got to be in writing. But now here's the other factors of it. It's got to be signed by the buyer or seller giving notice. So is a text message signed?
No,
The letter maybe not be signed. It could be. The email, I know there's the electronic signature or like you can add that language on here. This shows a signature verification, whatever. But for quick, simple purposes, an email is not signed. So that condition is not met. And then it must be received by the buyer or seller or the respective agent or the firm by the applicable deadline. So that's where the receive under that section 8, it didn't say any of that. But this section does. Evelyn's part of our staff, that she's checking your accounts, making sure that we have a buyer's notice of cancellation and that all of this exists. So even though she took the bait on the previous question, she was right. That is not okay to just send a text message. You've got to do this way. So that's where that buyer's notice of cancellation is so important. It's A, it's in writing. B, it's signed by your client. And then when you deliver it, I'm here to make things life easier on you, which then will make life easier more on her than it will on me. But if she has questions, you can come to me, and it's going to make life easier on everybody. You've got to show proof that you delivered this cancellation. You can do one of two ways. You can either put it in .loop and then send it to the other agent through .loop. And now we've got proof that that was delivered. It was sent. Very simple. It's already in the system. Or you can make it harder on yourself, which then makes it harder on us. You can send that cancellation through email, but then I need you to get a copy of your email that shows that you delivered that email to the other agent, and then put that in .loop. So I've got confirmation that you've delivered this cancellation before the deadline. Which way sounds easier?
buyer's notice of cancellation.
Yes. upload that into Dotloop and send it through Dotloop, and you're done. It'll be easier that way. We'll make it easier on her, make it easier on Julia.
Can I really like argue like, let's say the other party, let's say that we never had any interaction to Dotloop. And they may say, oh, we didn't get it,
Okay,
you know,
that can be an argument. And this is the way that I would combat that. First off, you may not know it in Dotloop. You can look at history to see if that person has reviewed the document. It shows that they've reviewed it. Second of all, if you're sending when you send all your other communication, I would assume prior to that, you would have communicated some other way through Dotloop too. And then they've verified that, oh yeah, I got your offer, we're all good. So if they've received their offer in the past through that email, then that's going to be our evidence to support that they receive it this next time around. Then I can also, it tells me if they've reviewed it, if they've clicked on it and looked at it. So, great question. All right, makes sense? So don't just follow what's in section 8, how to cancel the deal. Okay, there is a big difference between if you're canceling under 8.2.
Sorry, before you proceed, so the section 8, the other one that we did not discuss, section was that again?
Hold on a second, sorry. What was that?
The section 8 and the one we did not discuss, what
Yeah.
section was that?
8.1 and 8.3, if you just send the cancellation based on those two issues, you're good. 8.2, if you're canceling based on an appraisal, you've got to do something different. And if you don't, you potentially could cost your client financially. Who understands what this section is under 8.3? Anyone know what that section is? And for those of you that have written multiple offers, you should be able to answer this question without reading it.
like if the portion of the earnest money will be released to either, in this case, the seller, if there was a cancellation based on that, on financial or appraisal.
You were good up until the last word you used.
Finance.
Yes, not the appraisal. Okay, this paragraph, so if you can visualize the buyer's notice of cancellation, there's 3 boxes to check. The first one says, are you canceling before the due diligence? That's box number 1. Box number 2, you're canceling after due diligence, but before the financing deadline. Box number 2. Box number 3, you're canceling after the finance and due diligence deadline. You're just canceling. Those are the 3 options to check. So if you were canceling based on this condition off of financing, and the financing deadline has not passed, then you would want to check box number 2. After the due diligence, but before financing. And in this paragraph right here, if you were representing a seller, you don't understand this contract if you were leaving this blank. That's the polite way of saying it. The blunt way of saying it is you're an idiot if you're leaving this blank and you represent the seller. Because that means you don't understand what's happening. What the whole intention of this paragraph here is to separate the due diligence deadline and the financing deadline, and making the financing deadline, making sure that you're not using the financing deadline as a secondary due diligence right to cancel. Because if you put 0 here and you represent the seller, all you've done is given the buyer, you've extended the deadline, in my opinion, of the due diligence deadline. Because under the same reason, buyer's right to cancel, in buyer's sole discretion. We have that same term again. Let me explain to you where I'm going with this. Let's say that there are repairs that need to be done on the property. And you've passed the due diligence deadline, but your buyer, well, there's just all these repairs that still need to be done. So you go to the seller, hey, my buyer still wants all these repairs done. Seller says, no, not doing it. The due diligence deadline is passed. Okay. Well, then we're gonna cancel. And you click the box, you're canceling based on financing. What's the listing agent gonna say? Just from what I told you, what is the listing agent's response?
Your due diligence deadline is passed.
Your due diligence deadline's passed. So therefore, you're canceling not based on financing, you're canceling based on due diligence. Therefore, the earnest money belongs to the seller. Right? It's probably the argument they're gonna at least try to make. Do they have an argument?
Yes.
Yeah, I think they've got an argument. It's not a very good one.
They do.
Because now let me let me go the way that I would explain it. Well, you may think it's based on due diligence, but it is absolutely based on financing because my buyer now, because they have to spend $6,000 on all these repairs. Now they have $6,000 less that they can put towards their down payment or buying down the interest rate. So therefore, they're not comfortable with the terms of the loan. Buyer in sole discretion is not satisfied with the terms and conditions of the loan. Because now they have, their payment is now higher, even though it increased it by $1. Let's just say it's only $1. I wanted my payment to be $2,000, now it's $2,001. My buyer's not satisfied with the terms of the loan, so therefore they cancel based on financing and sorry, you're done, right? Now, the agents are going to go back and forth. No, you can't do that. At one point, I made that argument too. But at the end of the day, we're not going to go to court because they're going to look at it and say, that does affect the financing. It does. You can't tell me that they don't. And it's in the buyer's sole discretion. The buyer doesn't have to give a reason why they're canceling based on financing. They don't. So if you have $0 here, you've given the buyer the right to cancel based on any reason they want.
So what is the right answer?
So the right answer, what I use as a default, whatever I have determined the earnest money to be, I'm going to put half of the earnest money in that number if I represent the seller. So now if the buyer does choose to cancel after the due diligence, there's skin in the game that they've now given up. That means $2,500 in this example would have gone to the seller. Now the seller's still upset that the deal failed because they're under contract another property, but they can't control that. At least they got $2,500 that they otherwise wouldn't have got. So this is where I'm now, all of this would because I'm trying to go to 8.2. If
Putting 100% of the earnest money
It's fine.
there.
You can do that. Sure. Do you want to do that? If I'm the buyer, I mean, 6 months ago, the buyer has to do that. Today's market, they don't. So if you were the seller were to request that, I'd be like, screw you. And if you were going to demand that, fine, you can have your property sit on the market. I'll go find another house that is now available. So just keep that in mind. But sure, if the seller came back with that and the buyer accepted it, awesome. Great for the seller, bad for the buyer. But now we go back to 8.2. Why that makes a difference. 8.2, if you cancel, buyer's right to cancel. If after completion of an appraisal by a licensed appraiser, buyer receives written notice from the lender or the appraiser, the property is appraised for less than the purchase price, the notice of appraised value, buyer may cancel the REPC by providing written notice to the seller with a copy of the notice of appraised value. So remember, on the buyer's notice of cancellation, there's 3 options. Option 1 is box number 1, you're canceling before the due diligence. Box number 2, you're canceling after due diligence, but before the finance and appraisal deadline. So you're gonna use the same buyer's notice of cancellation, you would check box number 2. But if you don't provide this with your cancellation, that means you're canceling based on financing. Which in that case, there was $2,500 that your client just lost. But if you're canceling based on the appraisal and you provide a copy of the notice of appraised value with your cancellation, now you are canceling based on the appraisal, and that $2,500 is saved for the buyer. The seller does not get that cancellation or get that $2,500, and that's why I said, Carlos, is everything you said was accurate up until the last word. If you're trying, so it's important to know this difference, because your job is to protect your client's earnest money that was in the first paragraph, right? If you don't do this, you've now cost your client that money. Who wants to be in that situation? I'll tell you one simple story. I'll give that in the deadlines. Okay, we'll get that in a second. Okay, any questions about that? Make sense? Okay. Addenda, paragraph 9. This is important to fill out, because if you are making an offer and it includes addenda, those addenda are part of your offer. Think of it this way. How many pages of the REPC? 6. Let's go with the shoot in the middle. We had a 5, 6, and then we'll go with the 6. There's 6 pages of the REPC. Okay, all right. See, he verified it. There's 6 pages of the REPC. If you send an offer, and the offer only includes 4 of the 6 pages, have you presented the complete offer? You have not. It's no different here. So if you have an addenda, 2 addenda that are part of that offer, and you don't include it, this is where you need to identify where it's included. Now, when the seller counters, or if they counter, that's the way it should be done. There should, but your offer includes the addenda that are there. So like the lead-based paint, if you know the home's built before 1978, lead-based paint should automatically be checked in this. Make sure that's part of your offer. And I'll just ask this question, which is piggybacking off. Let's say that you make an offer. The offer is the REPC. It is the FHA addendum, and then a separate addendum. Let's label that one just addendum 2. The FHA addendum is addendum 1, and then you did a disclosure of interest because you're related to the buyer, and that's part of addendum 2. So so the offer, you send the offer, and the seller receives the offer. They're okay with everything on the REPC, the 6 pages. They're okay with the disclosure of interest, but they're not okay of doing an FHA loan. They want it to be conventional. So they are going to counter the offer, basically rejecting the FHA portion and just say it needs to be conventional. How would you counter the offer? And what I'm asking is, what's the process? What boxes you're checking? What is it? I don't know. You're not doing it. I want someone else to answer the question. She used to be one of our TCs, so I want someone else.
So they sent the counter.
So you're representing the seller. You're going to counter my offer. How would you counter my offer?
I will do an addendum.
Okay, on the addendum, but before you fill out the addendum, you got to do something with the REPC and the 2 previous addenda that we sent. What are you doing?
Oh, check the box that there are.
Okay, checking boxes. Checking what box?
There are addendums to the REPC.
Okay. So I heard a rejection. So you're rejecting what?
I'm rejecting that offer, but I'll send a counter.
Okay, so you would read, what is it, the REPC? In your counter, before you get in your counter, you're gonna have the REPC, FHA addendum, and then addendum 2. Would you accept, reject, or counter all 3 of those documents? What would you do? Okay, I'll get to you in a second.
So it's
Counter offer.
Okay, do you counter offer what, the REPC, or remember, we don't like the terms of the FHA addendum. Do I counter that? Or do I reject that? I'm gonna counter offer all 3.
Well, I guess you can reject the FHA VA loan addenda. You can reject that and just do a counter saying we want convention.
Okay, so you're saying counter the REPC, reject the FHA, and counter the addendum 2?
Correct.
Okay, so you've said, what's your name? Raul? You said counter all 3, and what's your name? Move on. And you got reject 1, counter the other 2. Okay, any other thoughts, Carlos?
So those 2 addendums, the FHA and addendum 2, are they checked on that section, right?
They're part of the offer.
Okay, so they're, okay. So since they're part of the offer, I'll have to counter the whole thing,
Say that again?
since they're already included on that section. Then I will counter like the entire REPC, including those.
So yours is, you're saying counter all 3 documents like Raul. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, because they're included on.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that is just one contract.
Okay. I intentionally wanted to have this because thank you for volunteering and thank you for putting yourself out there. Countering all 3 is the process, because remember, like I said before, that's all part of the offer. Those 2 addenda are part of the offer. So you can't, going back to my other example, can I reject page 2 of the REPC but accept pages 1, 3, 5, and 6? 4, 5? No, I'm either countering the whole thing, rejecting the whole thing, or accepting the whole thing. But people do exactly what you said, and that's why I wanted to address it. So the way to do it is you would hit counter on the REPC, counter on the FHA addendum, counter on addendum 2, with addendum 3 that you'd be countering, and then you say in addendum 3, the FHA addendum is rejected, buyer must use a conventional loan. Or whatever. And then if that gets accepted, now that's the term of the contract. So you either accept the whole contract, reject the whole contract, or you counter the whole contract. You do not take them in bits and pieces. Now, I use this as another example. How many of you guys have heard about the US Constitution? Okay. Hopefully everyone can raise their hand. Okay. Has anyone ever heard of an amendment to the Constitution?
Sure. It's 27.
Okay. So we don't change the original document, right? Otherwise you have chicken scratches everywhere on that original document. We amend. When there's a change in the original document, we amend it. We don't go back and change it. It's the same concept. So that's exactly what we're doing here. Okay. All right. Okay, section 10. This is what I wanted to go. This is a spin-off of what we talked about, seller's disclosures. I get this question all the time where either you represent the seller that is, let's say they're an investor, or you're buying a home that is from an investor or whatever it is. And the seller says that no seller's disclosures will be provided. You guys have heard this before if you haven't been involved in it, right? Do they have the right to do that?
Yes.
Okay, just because the time is short, we're going to agree with you. They have the right to do that. They can say that they're not going to provide seller's disclosures. Does that mean that if they have knowledge about something that they don't have to disclose it? And then let's say the knowledge of what we're talking about is a material fact. Do they have an obligation to disclose it?
Yes, they do.
Somewhere else in that contract, it states they have to.
Okay, but we just modified the contract that says the seller's disclosures aren't gonna be provided.
One thing is not to provide several disclosures and another is not to do what you're saying, the material part.
Okay?
It depends, right?
There we go. I like the answer. Not in this case, but I like the answer.
I'm just thinking about like, if I'm one of those sellers that says no disclosure. That property was a met house. You know, like something of that nature, we know. I mean, it has to be disclosed, right?
Yeah, so do you think as a buyer, I would like to know if it was a meth house?
Of course.
Now, yes, I have the right to do a test and find that out. But if you have knowledge that, hey, this thing is. Let me use a little more obvious. I use this in dealing with disclosures. Say like this wall has a big hole in it. We're talking, 3 by 3, whatever, massive hole in the wall. You walk in, when we take photos of the wall, we take a picture of it. So when we post those photos up on the MLS, there's a hole in the wall. Front door, you walk in, you're coming in and you walk like, whoa, okay, it is obvious. It is right there. Do you think that's a material fact that I have knowledge about as the seller? Yes. Do you think the seller has an obligation to disclose that? Yes. It depends. I'm gonna say this one depends. If you walk right in the front door and you can see that this is right there, it's probably, because one of the other things is on a material fact is whether or not it's readily available to be discovered by a reasonable buyer. If it's so obvious that it's right there, it's probably safe to say that the seller wouldn't have to disclose it because it's obvious. It's right like that. I mean, I didn't even think twice about it because you walk in, you see the hole in the wall. So I don't think a judge is gonna, if it went to court, I could show, here are the pictures. Here's right when you walk in the door, here's the video. It's obvious there's a hole in the wall. When you showed up after you bought the property, of course there's a hole in the wall. But now let's say there's a big picture that covers it up. So now when I take pictures of the house and I see a picture of a mountain range, whatever's right here. And when they do their inspection, there's a mountain range here. Is the inspector supposed to take all of the pictures off the wall and see if there's anything behind it? Lift up all the rugs to see if there's a hole in it? No, that's in that situation. Now they show up at closing, there's a big hole in the wall, or sorry, after it's at closing, possession, they see the hole in the wall. And that's when they find out about it the first time. That's going to be completely different. That would be readily available that they shouldn't disclose. So this paragraph, section 10, yes, the home's being sold in as-is condition, but the seller has an obligation to disclose a material fact that can't be readily discovered by a reasonable, prudent buyer. The seller buyer and seller, they have an obligation to do that legally. So by saying that seller's not going to provide seller's disclosures doesn't remove the seller's obligation to do this. So it's kind of a dramatic way. We actually did have, sorry, Alan, hold on one second. We did have a similar example. It wasn't on a wall. It was in a garage. They had big boards to catch oil, whatever. But they took the boards they left the boards when the property closed. The buyers came out to remove the boards, and there was a big, huge hole in the driveway, in the garage. I mean, it's a very similar scenario. Yeah.
So if they said they're not going to provide seller disclosures, could you make an offer with like a blank seller disclosure to have them fill it out as like part of your offer?
You can always do that. And so this is the issue. Even if let's just say you presented that with your offer, the seller says, I'm not filling those out. Now you can argue if they're putting that much hesitation to fill something out, my opinion, I would advise the buyer, I'm like, I can't force them to fill these out. And if something does happen that they should have disclosed, are you wanting to go try to sue them afterwards? Or would you rather go look for another property? It's up to you, buyer. But they're making this very difficult. And is this a property you want to, is this a seller you want to work with? It's probably what I would ultimately do. But yes, if I can get them to fill it out, I understand that we're not going to provide it, but we still want this information done. And you have an obligation. They may say no, because we agreed to waive those. I don't have that obligation. They're wrong. But whether or not it's gonna be resolved there is the problem you're gonna have to deal with.
So if they don't disclose in your example of the garage and the hall, they don't disclose that, does that become an illegal transaction? And then.
So what it would be, it's not that it's an illegal transaction. You could argue that the seller is in breach. And
Yes,
so
a contract.
where the lawsuit would occur is that the seller failed to disclose an item.
Right.
Can
Can they retrieve the can they say?
they
"Well, I'm
undo
filing
it?
for Yeah, can they undo it?
In most circumstances, I don't, well, it would go to court.
Yeah.
And could the court make that ruling? I guess it's possible. Usually that, I mean, it would have to, in my opinion, it would have to be something significant enough that because if the buyer would have known about that issue, would that have prevented them from purchasing the property? And if it was significant enough, then I guess,
You can make the argument.
yeah, I mean, it'd be tough. I haven't heard of that happening, but I'm sure anything's possible. Okay, all right, we've got, because I got. Okay. 10 more minutes, let's see here. And even though I'm skipping all over this doesn't mean that it's not important. It's just, I'm trying to get to the stuff that is the highest importance. Okay, section 16, this is what we talked about. Buyer or seller default. The remedies for either party are the exact same, they're just in reverse order. So if the buyer ends up in default, if buyer defaults, seller may elect one of the three options. Same thing here. If the seller's in default, buyer may elect one of the three options. The three options are this. One, the earnest money. So an option, if the buyer's in default, the earnest money would go to the seller, if that's the choice that the seller took. Option two, the parties can go to court and sue first to perform on the contract. So the buyer is in default, the seller wants the buyer to still buy the house. And they go to court, the seller agrees, buyer's obligated to now purchase the house. I haven't seen that one very often. I've seen it the opposite, where the seller doesn't want to sell the house anymore. They go to court and the court forces the seller to sell the house. I've seen that one. Or option three, the earnest money is returned to the buyer, and then the parties go to court and sue for whatever liquidated damages they feel they're entitled to. So the example that would be is, let's say that it's, our example is a $5,000 earnest money issue. Let's say that the seller feels like they've been damaged $10,000, which is great because anything under 11 grand still is under will stay in small claims court. So the seller could go to small claims court and make the argument that, hey, this is the reason why they feel like they're damaged up for 10 grand. And if the courts agree with the seller, the buyer would then owe the seller 10 grand instead of the $5,000 that they could have gotten. And the same thing, the reverse order is still in play. If the seller is in default, option A is not double the earnest money. It's the buyer gets their earnest money back that was being held at the brokerage trust account, and the seller would then owe the 5 grand. So the seller only pays 5 grand. It's not that they pay 10 grand. But in all the other two options are still the same.
So there is strategy in determining the earnest money, but is there a general rule of thumb? on how much that should be based on purchase price?
Oh, okay, on the amounts.
5,000, 10,000 is just,
Yeah, what, I mean. What seems to be happening, there isn't a rule of thumb, but earnest monies have gone up substantially as prices have gone up. For whatever reason, it seemed like when prices were $300,000, $400,000, $500,000, earnest money tended to be anywhere from 2,500 to maybe 7,500, right in that range. Then all of a sudden, properties now are $1 million. And if you took the same logic, that means the earnest money would have been around 12,500, something like that. But now it's 25 grand, it's 50 grand. Because it's $1 million, $1.5 million, $1 million, 2 million. Or $100,000 earnest money on a $3 million property, that's not uncommon. So there isn't a formula, it's just what's gonna take to get the deal under contract. But the key thing to understand, I hear this, well, if you're the buyer, the lowest amount of earnest money is the best. If you're the seller, the highest amount of earnest money is the best. That's where I would say it depends. Well, buyer, do you plan on being in default? Yes, I do. Okay, well then, if the lowest amount of earnest money is probably in your best interest. Seller, do you hope the buyer defaults? Yes. Well, then I guess having the highest amount of earnest money is the best for you. But the same reverse. Buyer, do you plan on defaulting? No. Well, what if the seller defaults? Well, I want it. Okay, well then, if you put in low earnest money, buyer, that's how much the seller's gonna owe you if they default. And same thing reverse for the seller. Seller, are you hoping that, I mean, if the buyer defaults, are you planning on defaulting? Well, there's a chance. Okay, well then, if you think you might default, you could owe that amount of money too. So we just have to communicate the way I would look at it is this. What do you think the dollar amount needs to be for either side to take this seriously? When I see $1,000 earnest money, both sides, like, no one's going to go to court for over $1,000. But when I'm seeing earnest money at 25 grand, people that have the 25 grand, 50, 100, lawsuits occur. That's where it becomes a big issue. $1,000 earnest money is nothing. Fine, come after me.
For the regular clients, like, how do we approach to all of this? Let's say we're listing property and we got an offer, or I mean, I guess we're the other way around too. Like, hey, this is the offer that we're presenting. How do we actually put all this in simple words that we wouldn't have to be liable legally for something that we're not liable for something, we're not exercising.
I don't think I understand.
How do we advise to our clients?
On what amount on default?
Yeah.
Section or
Yeah.
the entire contract?
How do we approach it? Just like, hey, you just gotta read this carefully and.
Okay, the way that, let me phrase it this way. When I'm talking with my client and I go over the paperwork, I just say, look, my job is to make you aware of the contract. Your job is to decide how you want to handle it. So, buyer or seller, let me just explain what this contract means, or what it, just so you know. Here's my little, I'm gonna deviate for a couple seconds. Please, when you guys are doing your public, your marketing, you're communicating, you're boastering on how awesome you are as an agent. Please be careful what you're doing here, because there are right now, I think 3, 4, 5 class action lawsuits right now in the country that are going after our industry. And they want to take us down. They want to change our industry based on the way it is currently being done right now. And if that happens, it's going to make our job 10 times harder, because the issue is dealing how compensation is being paid for right now. The way you get your paycheck if you're representing a buyer is it's typically being offered on the MLS, and the seller is paying a brokerage, then the brokerage is offering that, so you get paid. The way they want to do it is that's gone. So the way that you would get the seller, when they sell a property, they're only going to pay their listing agent a commission to sell the home. And if you have the buyer and you're going to go take a property, you got to now, you've got to buy a broker that says the buyer owes money. Well, now that buyer is going to have to pay that money. That's what they're wanting to do. And just think about this. When a buyer, right now, it's difficult for your buyers to qualify. Not only tough to qualify, but now they need their down payment, they need their closing costs, and now they need to pay your commission. The way that it's set up now, it works to prevent this. Where I'm going with this is agents are posting online, oh, I just picked up a $2 million buyer 5 days ago. We found a property, we closed in 24 hours. I just made 100 grand and I didn't have to do anything. Woo! Look at me. I'm awesome. Use me. Why? We are, or we go through, this is where we are our own problem. We started agents rather than, we have a fiduciary duty, which means we have to put our clients' interests ahead of our own. And so we start looking, you used to have the ability to look for properties, searching BAC. I only want to find properties that are paying a 3% commission. So automatically you exclude all the other ones, and those are the properties you show your client. That is a massive violation. But that's what agents were doing. They were spoon feeding these attorneys to come up with this lawsuit. So we have got to be careful the message we are sending. And part of this is we have an obligation to do our job. So back to your question is, how do you mention this? With electronic signatures, too many agents, they just, I just sent the offer for you, sign it. And so I can get the offer and go back. They don't even go over the offer with their client. It makes sense because they've never read it themselves. How can they explain it to their client when they've never read the contract? When I sit with I will go down and I tell them, we go over all the paperwork and I'll go over the paragraph. Hey, this paragraph, just so you know what it means. It just means that if for some reason you're in default, it will be this, this, and this. And it'll take a few seconds. This paragraph talks about attorney's fees or costs. If there was a problem, you would be responsible for paying your own attorney's fees, and the seller would be responsible for theirs. Or if it did go to court, the prevailing party could be entitled to it. This paragraph here is this. Any question? You don't have to just go over the general aspect of it. And then, of course, but you got to go over it. So many times the agent is being accused of never going over the documents. So that's the way I would basically handle it. And if you need more, we can talk about that a little bit later. Okay, 21, 5 p.m. Mountain Standard Time is the deadline. 5:01, you're in default, or you passed the deadline. Very simple. Excuse doesn't matter. It's happened. Deadline's done. Acceptance. Last you said. Acceptance occurs when these two things happen. Seller and buyer have signed the agreement, and the seller buyer agreement have communicated that it's been accepted. So it's got to be signed and communicated. You don't have to physically receive the paperwork for it to be accepted. But if you got a text message, hey, my clients signed your document, we're under contract, look forward to working with you. You're under contract. So make sure the mistake agents make is their client verbally says that, yeah, they intend to sign it. And then they go, hey, Rich, hey, great news. My client said they're going to sign your contract. They said they're going to sign it. And you interpret, hey, we're under contract. Or I said, hey, great news. My client signed the contract. When in reality, they haven't. But I communicated it. He's got an argument to say, no, we're under contract. You said The text message even says, we're under contract. He's created a very tough, great argument, and I've created the problem. Now, if they verbally, hey, Rich, just want to let you know, my client's not home right now. They like the term, they're tired of all the offers doing now. They've told me that they intend to accept your offer. But I don't have anything signed as of right now. Just want to give you a heads up. Okay, great. Are we under contract right now?
No.
We are not under contract. So if Rich interprets that as being under contract, that's his problem. We are not under contract. But I can have a verbally, we're under contract. But it's not enforceable. Okay, last right here, these deadlines. This is why I gotta get on another thing at 1 o'clock, another conference. There is no right or wrong answer here, but the seller's disclosure deadline, I typically say between 3 to 5 days. Due diligence, you know, I'd say between 10 to 14, being more in the 14 timeframe. Finance and appraisal between 21 to 24. And then settlement, you know, the 30. The part where this depends, always check with your lender. Because some loans, like a Utah housing, can take a little bit more time. So they may say, hey, 24 days is fine on the financing deadline. However, we need 35 or 40 days to get the paperwork. They take because they just take more time. So just check. It's always a good thing to just check with your lender to make sure that the timelines that you're thinking about will work. USDA takes a little while. Yeah. So pretty simple. Okay. If you have questions, unfortunately can't be right now, but if you do have questions, my office is just up here on the 6th floor. Feel free to come and talk to me. But hopefully I'm more funny than Russ, and you can now tell him that. And hopefully you pick something up. Okay. All right, thanks, guys. You as well.